the echo of what went unsaid. The premiere of Sword of the Frost Moon was less a television event and more a global cultural siege. The world wasn't just tuning in for a historical drama, they were tuning in for evidence. Every frame featuring Lee Minho's General Kim Shin and Song Hye-kyo's Queen Soo-ryan was subjected to a level of scrutiny typically reserved for political debates or moon landings. The agencies held their breath, praying the on-screen magic would be so powerful it would overwrite the off-screen narrative. It did, but not in the way they hoped. The chemistry that had leaked in whispers and gifs now exploded on screen in full, glorious, high-definition surround sound. It was undeniable. In their first scene together, a formal audience in the throne room where he is appointed as her personal guard, the air crackled. It wasn't in the dialogue, which was strictly protocol. It was in the way his eyes, sworn to the floor in respect, flickered up to hers for a fraction of a second longer than duty required. It was in the almost imperceptible tremor in her voice as she gave him her command, a vulnerability that the formidable queen should not possess in front of a mere guard. Viewers lost their collective minds. The ratings shattered records. Online forums were flooded with scene-by-scene analyses. "Did you see episode 3? A popular post read. "When he blocks the arrow for her, and she tends to his wound, she wasn't acting. The panic in her eyes was too real. She was checking him for real." Another user dissected a quiet moment in episode 5. He recites a poem about the moon, and her character is supposed to be unmoved. But Song Hye-kyo's ears turned pink. "You can't script that. That's a physiological response." The drama was a masterpiece, but the love story was a phenomenon. It felt less like performance and more like confession. The most devastating scene, a heart-wrenching farewell in the pouring rain, left audiences sobbing not just because of the powerful writing, but because the pain on their faces seemed to transcend the characters they were playing. Lee Minho's tears weren't just General Kim Shin's, they were mixed with something raw and personal, a finality that felt too real. And when Queen Soo-ryan reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek before he turned away, the gesture was so intimate, so full of unspoken grief, that it was almost difficult to watch. The wall was crumbling, and the pressure was building. The world was demanding answers they were still refusing to give. The inevitable explosion happened at the drama's wrap-up party, an exclusive, star-studded event held at a lavish Seoul hotel. It was meant to be a celebration, a final, controlled appearance before the two stars went their separate ways and the rumors would, the agencies hoped, finally die down. They were photographed arriving separately, of course. Lee Minho, dapper in a tailored black suit, waved to fans. Song Hye-kyo, a vision in a deep crimson gown, offered her signature elegant smile. For the first hour, it was perfect. They mingled with the cast and crew, always on opposite sides of the room, their interactions when forced by proximity polite and brief. But as the night wore on, and the champagne flowed, and the relief of a successful project settled in, the guards began to drop. A paparazzo, using a long-range lens from a nearby building, captured the moment the narrative finally shattered. It was a single photo, grainy from the distance and the low light, but crystal clear in its meaning. Lee Minho and Song Hye-kyo were on a secluded balcony, away from the main party. He was leaning against the railing, looking down at her. She was looking up at him, her face tilted, her expression soft and open in a way the public had never seen. One of his hands was gently tucked into his pocket, the other was resting on the railing, mere inches from her arm. But it was the look, the same look from the press conference, but now unfiltered, unguarded, and full of a weary, profound tenderness. She was smiling, not her red carpet smile, but a small, private, and slightly sad one. The photo was an earthquake. It was titled The Balcony Photo, and it broke the internet in ways the drama itself hadn't. The denials were now laughable. You couldn't blame this on edited audio or a misinterpreted gesture. This was a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. The agencies fell silent. The carefully constructed fortress of professionalism had been breached by a single, stolen image. In the weeks that followed, a strange quiet fell. Both actors went on to their next projects, their public schedules noticeably separate. The fervor began to cool, the world assuming that the balcony photo, was the tragic, beautiful full stop at the end of their story. Until Song Hye-kyo gave a rare, in-depth interview for a prestigious magazine. The interviewer, skillfully and gently, broached the subject of Sword of the Frost Moon and the unique working relationship with her co-star. Hye-kyo, who had spent a career masterfully deflecting personal questions, paused. She looked out the window, a faint, wistful smile playing on her lips. The interviewer held her breath. Some projects, Hye-kyo began, her voice soft, are like a very deep dream. You live in them so completely that the lines between you and your character, they become blurred. You share a soul with another person for a short, intense period of time. You share a world. And when it ends, it's like a part of you wakes up, and a part of you stays in that dream forever. She looked back at the interviewer, her eyes glistening with a sheen of unshed tears. It's a very precious and painful thing to find a counterpart who understands that silence, that world. It's a gift you carry with you long after the cameras stop rolling. She never said his name. She didn't have to. A week later, Minho was doing a live broadcast for his fans, answering questions from all over the world. Thousands of comments flew by. He was laughing, being his charming, playful self. Then one comment, bold and brave, floated to the top. What was the most memorable moment from filming Sword of the Frost Moon? He stopped. The playful grin faded into a thoughtful, softer expression. He looked down at his hands, a small, private smile, the same one from the balcony, touching his lips. "Ah," he said, his voice dropping into a more intimate register. "The most memorable moment." He paused, and the chat went wild with guesses. The action scenes, the rain scene, the premiere. He shook his head slightly, still smiling to himself. It wasn't a scene in the script. It was a moment of quiet, a moment of just understanding. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze intense and sincere. It was a moment so perfect and so real that you want to protect it from the entire world. You want to keep it just for yourself because putting it into words would only ruin its beauty. He took a breath, seeming to come back to the present. Some things are too precious to share. The silence that followed his statement was deafening. He quickly moved on to the next question, but it was too late. The message had been received. They never confirmed a relationship. They never walked a red carpet hand in hand. There were no romantic getaways spotted by paparazzi. But they didn't need to. Song Hye-kyo spoke of a shared soul and a painful, precious dream. Minho spoke of a quiet understanding too beautiful to put into words. They had given the world their truth, not in a press release, but in the language they had always used, the language of poetry, of nuance, of unspoken feeling. The story of Minho and Song Hye-kyo was never a story of a scandalous secret affair. It was a modern-day fairy tale about two stars who found a profound connection in the heart of a storm, who tried to hide it to protect its fragile, brilliant flame, but whose chemistry was so powerful, so true, that it became a character in its own right. It whispered in the space between their shoulders, screamed in a single grainy photo, and finally found its voice in two separate interviews that, when read together, formed the most beautiful love letter never sent. They tried to hide it, but in the end, their chemistry didn't just say it all. It sang it, and the world is still listening to the echo.